Welcome everyone to the Fall Capstone Forum. I just wanted to take a minute ahead of the presentation to sort of refresh everybody's memory about what the capstone is and how we do it here in entomology. So the College of Agriculture requires that all students graduating have a capstone experience. That can take many forms, but here in the Department of Entomology, we decided way back in 2006 or 2007 that we wanted to provide an opportunity, use this opportunity to provide our students with an opportunity to do a mentored research, extension, or teaching project. And we've, in its current inception, its current form, the two-part form that we use, we've been doing it that way ever since about 2007. And we also use this capstone forum or the project as a way to evaluate embedded university core curricular outcomes, specifically written communication, oral communication, and creative thinking. So all of those things are folded into the capstone and the way it's evaluated. So we have one capstone student this morning, and I'm going to hand it over to Trevor to make that introduction.
Well, thank you, Doug. Morning, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. Today, I'm really happy to introduce Michael Patrick Clark. Michael originally comes from Schererville, Indiana, which I probably just mispronounced, but I'm apologizing for that now. He came to us at Purdue here in fall of 2017, which technically means he's graduating well under the 4-year average. And that's because he has a position already lined up with a Davy tree. He'll be servicing Northwest Indiana and Chicago starting in January. Michael came to me in August at a time when I was starting to build out the Ignite program or Ignite project that I was awarded in the spring by the college. He was looking for a capstone project. He was really interested in doing outreach. He'll describe a little bit of his outreach background in a minute. And he and I started talking about transferring pedagogy from the college to the high school level and what my goals were. And he really lashed onto those with a lot of gusto. As you'll see, he's actually done more than what we'd originally planned on doing. And there have been some limitations. COVID has definitely prevented us from getting as much of what we want into the field as possible, although we've got it developed and hopefully we'll roll it out in the spring. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Michael. Michael, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Stamper. So Dr. Stamper has explained the gist of the project very well, and I'll add on to that. But first, let me introduce myself. So here's a little bit about me. So adding on to what Dr. Stamper said before, I have been involved in youth education developments as a general spectrum over the last about 8 or so years. The first case of this was with Indiana 4-H STEM education. And this is where middle school and high school students are invited to an event to learn about the STEM field, participate in different labs and exercises to learn about core values and different concepts, and then to take these ideas and bring them back to the communities to teach other students about the same topics and concepts. The second instance of my involvement was in CDE Entomology, and CDE stands for Career Development and Education. This is where 4-H and FFA members can get some real world experience and learn some real world information about the fields such as entomology, farming, and forestry. I was involved in the entomology sector of that as I'm an entomology major, both as a participant and a volunteer. And as a participant, I participated as early as 5th grade and all the way up to my senior year in high school. And as a volunteer starting my freshman year in college, I helped to chaperone events at the state level hosted at Purdue University, as well as promoting the resurrection of the tours that would go on after said events and competitions. The third instance of my involvement was in Lake County 4-H Entomology, which is my local county in Northwest Indiana, where I would assist learning events and opportunities with the superintendent of the project for 4-H, as well as hosting and aiding other events in other areas. So after college, I will be working with Davey Tree, and I'll be preparing to get ISA certified within the next 2 or so years, because that's the minimum I have to work in the field before I can get that certification with a degree. And aside from my career, I will be staying involved in youth development, whether that be through 4-H or FFA, or whether that would be I would host private events or workshops or educational opportunities, as well as staying in contact with my local extension office and being able to answer any questions that people might have that I'd be qualified to answer. So moving on to briefly explain the basis of the Unite project, STEM fields are rolling, which is an amazing thing. STEM fields are the fields that ultimately answer questions either at the smallest level or at the largest level, which are the societal grand challenges that we focus on in this field. So there's an increasing demand for quality workers to answer more of these questions that we have. There's more funding to find these answers. And pop culture has exposed this field more in recent times than any other time in history, with popular shows such as Common Criminal and detective shows. One issue is that public education lacks a focus on STEM fields. So in Indiana, the core values are English, reading, math, and science. They're kept mutually exclusive, and there's a set way to teach those values in K through 12, which it works, but the issue with that is it's a very standardized practice and it lacks diversity, which helps students go into different fields and become interested in different paths of life and in different careers. The goals of the Unite program are to create a sustainable entomology and forensic science program at the high school level. And the benefit of this is to broaden the spectrum of particularly the science field and entomology. With forensics, that combines all the core values of Indiana education in K through 12 in a real world field that students can become fascinated with and possibly pursue after high school. And if not, at least it's another field that students can learn about and learn to respect and honor. And it also encourages education of alternative topics besides forensics at the high school level, because if this project is successful, then this might prompt other fields to have their own special courses that students can take in public high schools as well, or even in private ones if they wish to do so. And what is involved in the Unite program? So there are 4 main areas of education that we are focused on. There are lesson outlines, there are presentations, there are videos, and there's lesson structure. So lesson outlines are essentially a more detailed layout of the information that we want to express in a unit or a lesson. And these also work for providing or for being a direct link to the PowerPoints, just simplified down a little bit, as well as a way for a teacher to get up to speed on a certain topic if they haven't been exposed to it too much, if at all. Presentations are the visual that students will see when they're being directed through a lesson. The other part is videos. Videos are just where there's another way for students to absorb information. We're supposed to be working with a Purdue media team. However, as Dr. Stamper mentioned before, with COVID kind of making the year hard to go through, making scheduling hard, making seeing people hard, just because people could get sick and you can get sick too. We didn't quite get to these, and once everything smooths out a little bit with the pandemic and with scheduling and with being able to see each other more, then this will be something that will be more on the front end of what we're supposed to do. And then lesson structure. So as you can see, there are 5 key concepts known as the 5 E's. First, students need to be engaged to where their attention is grabbed by an open air activity or by something interesting. Then the topic of interest is explored and just skimmed over at the very surface level. Then different topics under that can be explained in a little more detail. Topics of even more interest can be elaborated on, and any questions that have been brought up can be answered at this point. And after a lesson is done, it's time to evaluate the absorption of knowledge and retention of knowledge from teacher to student. And moving on to the next slide. So the main part that we did this semester was working on outlines and presentations. And the outlines I did also go with these presentations. Originally, I was only set up to do 2 presentations and 2 outlines, which would be introduction to insect identification, as well as collecting, preserving and transporting insects. What I noticed was that when I made the slides for collecting, preserving, and transporting insects and the outline, there was a lot of information that could have gone into those lessons that was left out because I wanted to keep the lesson substantial, but also not make it too long. So I decided to split these into two different lesson plans and add all that extra information in because it just wasn't right with me to keep information out that students can be learning. I mean, some of the information is very complicated, but at the same time, it helps enrich the experience of the class and the topic a little bit better. And then as there also is an entomology portion of this, I didn't feel like I talked about insects enough with this project. So I also wanted to add a section talking about taxonomy at a very basic level. And essentially I made this lesson to the middle school and high school level, which would be what you would see in CDE entomology events for local, regional, and state, just to show people how to differentiate between different orders of insects, look at the physical features, see when insects come out and where, in what environment they would be in. And these presentations are all very bare bones. And the reason I left them this way is to allow teachers to design them to their own wishes, just so students aren't surprised or thrown off by a completely different design and outlay of a presentation. This way, students are still in a familiar environment, which, I mean, it's not too obscure because the information, of course, isn't traditional, but that also helps keep students' attention while making sure that they're not too thrown off to where they're distracted. And following this up, I have a few examples of presentation slides that teachers can make very easily on their own. So the first slide is from a second lesson plan where I talk about collecting insects. And as you can see, the lesson plan or the slide here isn't too complicated. It's very, very simple because that helps people to retain the information a little bit better, but it still hits key concepts very well to where students learn what's most important. So they know that, and then they can add on to that at a later time. And the visuals here aren't too complicated. They're just very simple, depicting what students are being taught at that very instant moment. For example, with trapping versus manually collecting insects, there's an example of a trap that's engineered to be put in one place to passively collect insects and keep them contained in one area. Whereas the person with the net is going out into the field and actively putting energy into collecting insects in their own environment and containing them with his own energy at a certain point in time. Next example of a slide is here with my first lesson, Introduction to Insect Identification, which is different from taxonomy because it's focusing on identifying insects versus other arthropods. But in this slide, I was showing different features of different insects, such as common things that students would know, such as bumblebees, monarchs, and even moths, but also including insects that students might not know, such as a wheel bug or assassin bug, diving beetles, and the mouth part of a fly. And with these insects that they know and don't know, there are different traits and features associated with those listed on the right that students can use to identify insects at a later time by associating those unique features with a purpose, with an actual visual insect that's right in front of them. And the last slide idea, and I'll leave this up for a little bit extra time so everyone can read through it, but this is an example of an opening scenario. So this is a way for students to work in groups, to come up with creative ideas, to come up with very thoughtful answers, to exchange ideas. And also it adds a little bit of competitiveness in certain situations where the opening activity is kind of to come up with as many ideas as you can, come up with the best ideas. And this is just a certain situation where there's one scenario and it's not quite based on that competitive feel, but it's a way for students to really think about a topic and be primed to learn about a certain topic. I'll stay up for a few more seconds before I move, just so I make sure everyone can read through this. All right, moving on to the next slide. So this should be my extra work, but another thing I did in addition to the slides was my forage collection has been sitting around for the past 3 years. I've maintained it and kept it in good condition, made sure nothing's been damaged. However, it hasn't been used for that entire time. And I figured with the high school being introduced to this field of entomology, that I could donate my insect collection, which it's supposed to have 100 insects in 4-H, but I had an extra one, so it's 101 insects. And they're all identified by order, family, genus, and species. And in my lesson plans, I've only gone as far down on identification as to order, but if a teacher wished to do so, they could go down to the family order or to the family level, for example, and have students learn different insects and differentiate them based on family, which the collection can help with that. All insects are labeled very simply with just county, state, month, and year of collection. Whereas the labels that we make in college and, for example, in Dr. Rossetto's class are more complicated, have more detailed information. These are very simple labels. Students can get a very simple gist of what needs to be on a label at a middle school and high school level for 4-H and FFA. And they can see that collecting insects requires collecting information just to know the story behind it. So it's not just you grabbed an insect, put it on a pin, and it's done. And the collection is also an excellent hands-on learning tool for students. A lot of high schools either have very old collections that are seemingly worn out, or they've thrown them out a while ago, or they don't replace them, or they never had them in the first place. But when high schools and middle schools have these live collections or pin to preserve collections and they're taken care of, such as in the case of William Henry Harrison High School, it acts as an amazing hands-on learning tool that just provides a different experience for learning than anything else. And it's great to know about the Ignite project, everything that's been done, but what is the importance of the project? So, as I've touched on before, it's important to educate on alternative topics. Whereas the main way to do this is through youth development programs such as 4-H and FFA or Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. This is a way for public schools to teach on alternative topics that a lot of students otherwise wouldn't really learn about besides on TV or reading or in pop culture. This acts as an excellent method for youth outreach and extension from Purdue University to, for example, William Henry Harrison High School, which is the high school that we worked with, as well as any colleges that do a project similar to this with other schools, such as middle schools, high schools, elementary schools. It's amazing for hands-on learning because a lot of the activities that we've designed for this class are very hands-on learning. They use reagents, they use cameras, actual devices that people in the actual field would use. And it also, as we've seen over the semester, there is a certain drive and passion from the students in all the activities that we've made and presented so far, because while it's still school and it's still learning and it can get complacent from day to day, this is a different topic. And this is something that students are actually interested in because they've seen it on TV, for example, or they've read about it, and they can actually learn about how it works, which is amazing. And this drive and this passion leads to people going into certain fields and doing important work that changes the world one way or another. And as you can see here, there are a few pictures. The top two pictures are of students messing with insects on pins and looking at them closely. And if you look at the bottom photo in the top left corner, if you see that teal blue sliver with a bunch of little dots on it, that's actually one of my boards I donated. And you can see, well, it's hard to see on here, but there's a pretty fair diversity of insects pinned on that board. And I've suggested this to the teacher and she's agreed to make moves on this, but getting Riker mount boxes and putting insects in those. So instead of having the insects pinned to an open board, then they'd be in boxes, protected, stored, and that students could handle the insect boxes and actually look at them in closer detail without damaging the specimens. And on this slide, of course, there are more questions, or not questions, but there are more pictures of students doing various different things with the insects or doing various other activities. And with that, all my information on the capstone has been presented, and I'm open to any questions, which can be posted in the Q&A section. And it will be open. I have it open right now. All right, so Dr. Howland mentioned a question. You mentioned early the problem of siloed topics with STEM. How do you stress integrating these? of siloed topics within STEM. Okay, so I'm assuming that this means the English, science, math, and reading. So there isn't really focus. Okay, perfect. There isn't really any focus on focusing on these main topics individually. They're just more integrated, and it's more of a passive way to introduce these topics or accelerate these topics in students as time goes on, because we don't really mention the certain topics. However, as students exercise the different activities that are designed for the class and learn about the topics, they're in the back of their mind, they're exercising these skills that are laid out in the Indiana core values and ultimately progressing themselves in these different areas as well as learning about a new field. I hope that answers the question. If you want to go on about it a little bit longer or elaborate about it a little bit better, I can attempt to, but all right. Okay, I have the chat open as well. So let's question me here. All right. So I see Dr. Neal has a question in the chat. So what are your thoughts on students who have zero interest in insects or are afraid of them? Do they have alternatives? So the problem is with right now, the school situation, not necessarily, or there might be alternative activities designed for them in the future before this project becomes completely finalized and is untouchable. However, like in the future, there can be other topics or other fields easily made into courses such as forensic science and entomology. And we'll just have to wait and see whenever that happens, if that happens. But this is a great way to pioneer this trend of different information being presented to students and just seeing what students want to learn about and get to know more, whether they're afraid of insects or whether they just don't have any interest. Do you have plans to follow up on the impact of your work in the long term? Yeah, I would say so. I always have one thing I've always cared about is seeing students succeed and seeing children actually making their way through things. And this is one example of giving students and children another opportunity to better understand different topics or diversify their education, which is, in my opinion, one of the most important things that can be done for the youth in making them ready for the real world. So I would love to see in a year, maybe 2 years or 5 years, how this project is going and if there's any additions to it, or if William Henry Harrison High School, as that's the high school we're working with, decides to take up any possible other fields and make them into classes that are friendly for the high school level, whether it's our classes upperclassmen friendly, whether they make a lowerclassmen or upperclassmen class or anything or something that everyone can take that's not forensics or entomology based. But I really would like to see just how well a forensics class can go. And so far, it seems like students are very, very interested in the topic. All right. Open. Okay. Oh,
Sorry, you've got 2 questions over in the Q&A. Do you want me to just read them to you? Would that be easier, Michael?
if you want to, you can. I actually do see them right now.
Okay.
All right. So I see a question from Dr. Ingwell. Can you talk more about the buy-in from the teachers you talked to in public education and what you had to do to help get insects integrated into their curriculum? How hard was it to convince them to try out this activity? So it was this, I'm assuming this is about the collection, about what I donated. So the story behind the collection was during a weekly meeting talking about our progress on making outlines and presentations. I remembered I was going home to grab a few things and then my collection was there. And it's been sitting there and I've been trying to do something with it, whether donating it to my local 4-H entomology team or donating it to a college or anything like that. However, I figure I've been trying to wait for an opportunity that'd be the most impactful in educating children or adults or adding to a basis of information. So I talked with the teacher that's in charge of this project at the high school level. She seemed pretty interested in it. I told her all you have to do is just take them in, just make sure the insects don't get destroyed. And if you want to transfer the insects to different containers, you can. I have some suggestions for that. And we talked about it over the course of a few weeks before I brought in the insects. And ever since then, she's kept the insects well, the insects right now are on a ceiling tile with some felt pad over them. And she's kept the insect on the boards, and I don't believe the insects have really been tampered with all that much. I think they've just been left on the board, and it can be put like in the center of the classroom or off to the side where it's open for students to look at it. And the teacher has been pretty strict on allowing people to. Oh, okay. Sorry, I saw a little change in the chat. And students have been honoring the system really well of not touching the insects, but looking at them, or at least handling them by the pins very carefully. And they've been shown how to handle the insects by pin very carefully, not to damage them. I hope that answers the question thoroughly enough. And I see Dane Hill has asked a question. Is there a plan of action for teaching the forensic science portion or Ignite? And if so, how would this be implemented? Focusing on entomology information or a broad overview of the program? So with the forensic and entomology section topics both, this is college information being transferred down to the high school level. So things that would be normal to teach about at the college level that are more complicated would either be obsolete at the high school level since they'd be too in depth, or they'd be simplified because they're pretty big topics. Entomology is very, very big. I mean, I'm going through a 4-year program right now, and many of the people that are watching this presentation right now are students, and they understand that entomology is a very, very big field with a lot of grand challenges, a lot of different subcategories of the large field. And forensics is a very large field as well, where there are many different concepts and ideas to understand. And the idea of this class is just to bring a brief overview of everything and go into at least some detail so it can help trigger some of that fascination and cue some out-of-the-box learning from students. I see Elizabeth Barnes has asked a question. Do you have plans to follow up on the, oh, that's the same question. I'll wait and see if there are any other questions that come up. And I'm sorry about if I'm not answering any questions perfectly. I'm not a professional, of course, with youth education. I've just been very involved in it, but it's something I am still passionate about a decent bit, and I'll still stay involved in after I'm done with my college education and once I get into a decent career. All right,
Great work so far, Michael. Are there any last questions, either in the Q&A or down in the chat, that anybody would like to ask Michael?
Thank you, Dr. Ginzel. Thank you, Dr. Richmond.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Michael did a great job. This has been a great first step forward in the Ignite program that I've been working on. And Michael's been a great student to work with. We've got a lot of good information. He's built a lot of good information for the program. So thank you, everybody. Best wishes to everybody. I hope you're all doing well. And I'm sure we'll talk soon. All right. Michael, excellent job. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stamper.